You guys see start recording somewhere? You guys think it's recording? Okay, it says recording has started. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have any questions or if you want to add anything, just raise hand and I will get to you. But we can leave the questions at the end. Let me share my screen. Okay, so you guys see the screen?
I can
Yeah.
see that.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's get started. So today's training is for Americans with Disabilities Act, which is ADA. Uh, my name is Habib Mohammed, and I'm one of the project managers in the highway department. So most of you know me, and we have a meeting on Thursday, right? Where we can meet all of us for new people. Is that Thursday or when is it?
This is Thursday.
Okay. All right, let's get started. So the agenda for today is what's ADA and what are the federal guidelines? Uh, what is the M.SHA ADA policy? What are M. Standards? Data collection, checklists, ADA design waiver, and so on. So how many of you know about ADA already? I believe Wahid, you have done ADA, Gerard, you have done ADA, and Rachel, right? Little bit.
Yes.
So basically, ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities, and it's an act of 1990, and it's civil rights law. So it has to be enforced. So it applies to all individuals. So it is regulated by the state and local agencies, regardless of the funding. So whenever you do a project, so if you are disturbing like sidewalk or something, then you have to make it ADA compliant. So and why you have to do it? Because it's a law. Let's move on. So the next item is like the federal guidelines. So the federal guidelines are known as ADA AG, which is American Disabilities Act with accessibility guidelines, and it was developed by US Access Board, and the latest version is 2010. And these guidelines are enforced by Department of Transportation and also Department of Justice. And the best practices are encouraged because these federal guidelines are like minimum guidelines. So all the state and local agencies are encouraged to exceed these guidelines. For example, as per the federal guidelines, ramp clear width is like 36-inch, but M.SHA standard is like 60-inch. So for a existing condition, suppose you went to a field and the ramp clear width you saw is like 36-inch, it meets the federal guidelines, but M. Guidelines are not met. So it's still not compliant as per M. Guidelines. So it has to be either made compliant or you have to apply for a waiver. For similarly, for ramp slope, the max slope is 1 to 10 as per federal guidelines, but the M.SHA is 1 to 12. So 1 to 12 is how much percentage, Gerard? Sorry to put you on the spot here, but just want to make it interactive.
Say that again. What was the question?
Yeah, 1 to 12 is how much percentage?
Eight.
Yes, you 8.33. Yep. So anything above 8.33, suppose you went to the field and you measured the slope as like 10%, then it's not compliant. So basically, M. Guidelines are more stringent than the federal guidelines. Is it the case for you also in the water resources, Ankur? are the MDOT guidelines more stringent than the federal guidelines? Ankur is not here. Maybe Arun can answer that.
Yeah, this is
Right?
Mahendra Habib, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you are correct. That same applies here.
Okay. So federal guidelines are like less stringent and these are minimum guidelines. So you can meet those, but if you don't meet the MDOT guidelines, then the project will be non-compliant.
Yeah,
Okay. So
maybe the federal is for the entire state. So
yeah, federal is for the entire state and local agencies and state DOTs are encouraged to have like stringent or more, more stringent than the federal guidelines. So let's move on to the next slide. So I think most of you here, you saw this, right? I mean, this is where you see the M.SHA policy and the guidelines, and I have provided the link here. So once you click this link, it will take you to that page where you have these document. And this was initially developed in 2002, and then it got updated in 2005, and then eventually in June 2010. So from June 2010 until now, there is no update. So basically, whatever policy was set back in 2010 is still good. So which is very good, amazing, right? How often you see that, you know? I mean, policies change, but this is what, 13 years now, and the same standards are there and the same guidelines are there. So whatever policy was developed back in June 2010 was very good. So it still applies. So there is no change. So when you click this link, it will take you to that page and it has like maybe for around 40 some pages. Either you can just view it, save it as, or download it and whatever as per your need. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, let's move on. So what is the M.SHA business plan? So M.SHA, what they did was they audited their like 50 to 100-mile roadway network to see if the sidewalks are compliant or not. And they want to, if they are not compliant, they want to make it compliant. So their goal is like 2% annually. So they want to improve at least by minimum 2% every year to make the sidewalks non-compliant. I mean, so whenever you do a roadway project and you touch any sidewalk or something, then you have to make it compliant. So that's their business plan. And I remember this was back in the 2007 or something. This was a big thing and this was new thing actually. And most of the people were not aware. And there was one guy named John Gower and all the plans used to go to him. And before the advertisement, he used to issue these letters saying if your project is compliant or non-compliant. So if your project was non-compliant at that time, then you cannot go for advertisement, you know. So, but now people are more familiar with this. So ADA is not a big issue at this time because most of the people are familiar and they take care of these before PSNE most of the times. And we have other problems like our PRD is the new thing nowadays, you know. Without that, you can't even go to, without concept, you can't even go to PI nowadays. So other things have taken over, but back in like 2007, this was like a main item and people were new and they didn't knew what to do. And all of a sudden you will get a letter from John Gower that saying your project is non-compliant and he will provide some comments. And then you have to address those comments to make them compliant. And after you get that letter that your project is compliant, then it will go for construction. Okay, let's move on. So what is the M.SHA ADA policy? So SHA policy is to accommodate of all persons with disabilities and make it a routine and integral element of planning, design, construction, operations, and maintenance activities for all projects. So facilities can be approached, entered, and used by the individuals with disabilities easily and conveniently. I mean, people without disability, they can access all these facilities easily. I mean, if there is no sidewalk, you just walk on the road, or you do whatever needs to be done. But people with disabilities, they cannot do that. So for them, they need to have these sidewalks and other ADA components. So based on the SHA policy, they have three categories of projects known as level 1, which are like maintenance projects. And previously, these maintenance projects, they didn't need to be ADA compliant, but the new guidance, they are requiring ADA compliance for even the maintenance projects. But it depends on the case by case basis. Sometimes you can apply for ADA waiver, and there is no guarantee that you applied ADA waiver that they will accept it. So like cost or right of way and all these other things uh, are factors, but they should not be the only factors for not making any project ADA compliant. So you should always try to have the project ADA compliant. So the level 2 projects are Fund 77 project like resurfacing and stuff. Level 3 is the major reconstruction and constructions. Let's move on to the next one. So on this one, basically, like I discussed in the previous slide, the maintenance projects, they were not required for ADA compliancy. But however, with the new guidance, it states that micro surfacing, thin lift overlays, and cape seals are considered roadway alterations and will require ADA requirement nowadays. Anything you guys want to add so far? Are you guys following?
Yes,
Okay.
we're following.
All right. Sounds good,
Quick
man.
question, Habib. So
Yeah.
John Goover is no longer reviewing and giving approvals anymore?
I don't think so, man. It's been a while, so
Okay.
I think he has moved to other divisions, I believe. Right.
Okay.
I don't know anybody has done any ADA projects recently at Brody's team. Maybe Wahid can answer this.
Yeah, MD-17, I think that's a ADA project.
Yeah. So who do you have to deal with? Maybe if you don't know the answer, is fine. We can move on. But
Yeah, maybe Gerard can answer that. I don't know who we deal with.
okay. But back in the day, like around 2007, when this was new, John Gover was the main guy, and everything used to go to him. And he had some staff of people, and they used to issue all these letters or comments if your project is compliant or not. And he used to also conduct ADA trainings at MDOT. So like how they do the PRD training sometimes at the MDOT facilities, they used to do the ADA trainings, and one of the trainings I attended like around 2007 or something. Okay, let's move on. So what are the basic issues? So the purpose of ADA is to provide equal access to programs, services, and facilities to all citizens. And the system is basically traditionally built for people who don't have any disabilities, like who can have sight, are strong, agile, and can hear. But people who have some disabilities, usually the system was not built for them. So that is one of the basic issues that was there, and that is the reason ADA came into force. So the system has to adapt to the user. So that's why we need to fix all the sidewalks as we do the roads. So if the sidewalk is damaged or have any issues, how we reconstruct them or if or repave them. Similarly, we have to fix the sidewalks. So SHA hopes to address these issues through implementing ADA on all projects. All right, so what are the ADA components? So the main components for ADA are like sidewalks and sidewalk pedestrian ramps, driveways, and then you have medians, and then accessible pedestrian signals. So let's look at each one of them one by one. So the first one is sidewalk. So the main purpose of sidewalk is that they shall be designed to serve all pedestrians, including those with disabilities and without disabilities. And so some of the issues you have with the sidewalks are there could be sudden changes in grade or direction, or there could be steep cross slopes, or there could be unexpected obstacles. Sometimes there is a pole in between or something, or a mailbox or any other obstacles like a guy wire or other obstacles. And then sometimes sidewalk settles. If it's like an old sidewalk, depending on the soil, you might have seen in the field that there is some elevation difference between sidewalk panels. It's called drop off or it's called lip also sometimes. And then sometimes you have narrow pathways. Suppose sometimes you have like a 5-foot sidewalk and all of a sudden there is some damage to the sidewalk and then you have like only 2 feet or something. And also another issue could be the sidewalk could be close to the traffic and there is no protection. There could be no curb and stuff. So that's also a potential hazard. And the next item is the minimum sidewalk width. Like how we discussed in the previous slide, the federal requirement was 36-inch, but MDOT requirement is 60-inch. So anything which is less than 60-inch as per MDOT standard, it is not compliant. And this sidewalk width does not include the curb. So usually curb is like 8-inch top of the curb. That's if you measure it using a tape, it's usually 8-inch. Okay, and the minimum sidewalk width at the isolated pinch points is 36-inch. Isolated pinch point could be sometimes you have like a power pole in between, and sometimes it is expensive to relocate these power poles. And so then you can have like 36-inch minimum, and you can apply for a design waiver for that. And there is no guarantee that it will get approved. They will look at all the criteria and all the field data, and they will decide if ADA waiver is valid or not. And then you can move forward after that. So the maximum cross slope for the sidewalk should be 2%. So if all these requirements are met, then you are good. The sidewalk is compliant. If these all of these, not just one, all of these criteria is not met, then it is not compliant. Then you have to require a design or requested design waiver, and if it's approved, then the project will go for construction. If it's not approved, then you have to make the project ADA compliant, and then you can proceed further. Okay. Anything you guys want to add on the sidewalks? Okay, all right, let's move on. So the next component is pedestrian ramps or pedestrian sidewalk ramps, not the roadway ramps for the vehicles. So sometimes people get confused about that. So let's look at the terminologies that the ramp has. So one of them is the cross slope, and the cross slope has to be 2%, and this cross slope is perpendicular to the path of the curb. And then you have a running slope, and the running slope is the slope which is parallel to the path of the curb, and this can be more than 2% and should not exceed the grade of the existing roadway. So the running slope can be more than 2%, but cross slope has to be 2% all the time. It cannot be more than 2%. And then you have something called landing area. I will show you in the following slides where it is. And this has to be 60 inch by 60 inch, which is 5 by 5. And this has to be always like level, which means it can be located at sometimes on the top or bottom of the ramp, depending on the type of the ramp, and should not have more than 2% running slope. And then you have something called flare, and this is like a diagonal piece of concrete on either side of the ramps. And you will see this in one of the examples I will show you in the later slides. And it cannot exceed 12:1 slope. And usually this is used in the MD standard 655.11. And then you have the last item, which is the transition panel. So transition panel, some of you already know. Basically what happens is at the end of your projects, or at the project limit, sometimes as per the MDOT standard, you have to have like 5 feet minimum sidewalk. But where your project is ending, sometimes you tie it with adjacent sidewalks, which could be lower than the 660 inch. So in those cases, you provide like additional 5-foot transition panel. So I will show you in one of the examples in the future slides. All right, let's move on. So the next item is the different types of sidewalk ramps. As per MDOT, there are like 3 types of standard ramps, and this one is one of the standard ramps. And this is called perpendicular ramp, and this is MD standard 655.11. And basically in this ramp, you have 2 flares, and then also additional, it's not a flare, but you will have like a 2-to-1 area, and then you have the level landing area on top of it. And this one has to have like 48-to-1 max running slope, and which is like 2%. So it has to be a flat area. And then you have 12-to-1, 12-to-1. And this ramp usually is used where you have some kind of grass buffer or any hardscape buffer. Maybe sometimes you have concrete. So this is where you used this kind of ramp. And the sidewalk is over here. And this is grassed or hardscape area. So the sidewalk has to have like 2% cross slope. And the running slope over here, it has to match the existing roadway, whatever slope you have for the roadway. So that has to be matched over here. It cannot exceed that slope. So it can be, so the running slope can be more than 2%, but cannot be more than the existing roadway slope. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Let's see what we have. Okay, this is the example of the perpendicular ramp. So here you see that you have the 12-to-1 ramp slope, and then you have the landing area up top. And this has to be like a 5 by 5 area. It cannot be less than 5 by 5. If it is less than 5 by 5, then this ramp is not compliant. So all these slopes have to meet. So the landing has to be 5 by 5. this area has to be 5 by 5, 5 feet width. Ramp width should be 5 feet, and this slopes have to be 12 to 1 also. So any of these do not meet, then the ramp is not compliant. So let's see what we have. This ramp requires 5-foot landing at the top and should be utilized where wide sidewalk is available. And this takes most space among the different types of ramps you will see. So anytime you have more than 5 feet sidewalk, then only you can use this ramp. If the sidewalk is equal to 5 feet, then you cannot use this ramp. Yes, so the next one is called parallel ramp. And this ramp, as you see, doesn't have buffer. The other one, the one which we discussed before, had more than 5 feet sidewalk, and it could have some grass or hardscape buffer. So this one doesn't have any buffer or anything. And like the other ramp, this one also has 48 to 1 max running slope. And then you have 2 flares here, which has to be 12 to 1 max. And then the cross slope of the sidewalk over here should be also 2%. So the ramp could be compliant, but if the cross slope here is more than 48 to 1, then the sidewalk is not compliant. So for this, suppose in existing conditions, if you see this ramp, then it has to meet all these criteria. It has to have this 12 to 1 flares, and it has to have this 48 to 1 running slope, and also the width of the ramp. This is called landing. So this has to be also 5 feet, and sidewalk usually has to be 5 feet also. So here should be 5 feet, here should be 5 feet, and this flare usually depends on the height of the curb. Suppose you have like 6 foot height, 6-inch height curve, then this flare length will be 6 feet. And if you have like 8-inch height curve, then this will be 8-inch. So depending on the height of the curve, this flare will change. And it has to be 12 to 1. So, but the as per MDOT standards, anytime you have a curve which is less than 4-inch, then the curb is not compliant. That has to be replaced. It has to be replaced. So usually you will see like at a minimum 4-inch flares. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this is an example of the parallel ramp, which is MD standard 655.12. And as you can see, the landing area, this slope has to be 2%, and the flare slope has to be 12 to 1. And this ramp type should be utilized when sidewalk is running parallel right next to the road without any buffer. Everything is good so far? You guys following? The
Yes,
speed is
sir.
okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, all right, let's move on to the next one. All right, this is the third kind of MDOT standard ramp. And this is basically combination of the previous 2 ramps. And this one will have also grass or hardscape buffer. And this one has, wherever you have that grass buffer, you will have this 12 to 1 max. It has to be less than or equal to 12 to 1. It cannot be more than that. And then you have the running slope, which has to be 2% max. And then you have those flares here, and 12 to 1, 12 to 1 max. And again, these flares depends on the curb height. So if the height is like 8-inch or something, then this will be like maybe 6" or something, because some of the slope is covered here. So as long you have the 12, so the what do you call, the length of the flare is not an issue. The issue is the 12:1 max slope. So that has to be met. So as long you have the 12:1 max slope, then we are good. So all these criteria has to be met: 12:1 max, 2% max, 12:1 max, 12:1, and 48. Then if all these criteria is met, then you have this ramp as compliant ramp. Otherwise, you have to redesign it and make it compliant. Is anybody saying anything? I heard something. Okay, no, all right. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So this is one of the examples of the combination ramp. So you need to have 12:1, 48:1, 12:1, 12:1. And this ramp should be utilized when buffer exists. So whenever buffer is there, then only you can have this kind of ramp. And this buffer can be grass like how it's shown here, or it could be any other hardscape, could be concrete or anything. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So all slopes shall be measured independent to the surrounding terrain. So all of these slopes have to be measured. So whenever you go to the field, whenever you see these existing sidewalk ramps, you have to measure all these, and all these slopes, widths, lengths, heights have to be, they need to be measured, and all of them should meet the standards. So what is this saying? Therefore, the length of the ramp is solely depend on the height of the curb, like I mentioned to you before, like 6" curb, then you will have 6-foot ramp, and then 8" curb, then you will have 8-foot ramp. And then the running slope on the landing area must be maximum 2%. So it cannot be more than 2%. And the cross slope of the landing area cannot exceed the grade of the roadway, and 2% is preferred. If you can do 2%, it is preferable, but it cannot be more than the grade of the roadway. And the maximum flare slope has to be 12:1. And this is used on the 655.11 ramp, which is, I believe, the perpendicular ramp. Yeah. And the maximum ramp's running slope has to be 12:1. Right. Okay, this is another look at the MD 65.11. So this is called the ramp, and then you have the flares, and then you have approach, and then landing area is on the top over here. So the slopes of the landing area cannot exceed 2%, and the maximum flare slope has to be 12:1 also, and the maximum ramp slope is also 12:1, which is this one. So this one has to be 12:1, this one, and this one also has to be 12:1, and this landing area has to be 48:1 or 2%. So anytime you have slopes exceeding these, then the ramp is not compliant, then you have to reconstruct it. Okay, let's look at the next slide. And this is another look at the MD 655.12, which is the parallel ramp. And here the landing area is here, not at the top like the previous ramp. And then you have the running slope here on both sides, and then you have approach sidewalk on both sides. And the cross slope of the landing area has to be 2% max, and the maximum ramp running slope has to be 12:1 or 8.3%. Okay, so here is another look at the 655.13, which is a combination of the parallel and the perpendicular ramp. And you have basically grass and hardscape buffer here, and the landing area, running slope, and ramp slope. If the buffer area is greater than or equal to 4 feet wide, then landing area must be 2% times 2%. If buffer is less than 4, then landing area cannot exceed the grade of the roadway. And the maximum ramp running slope is 12:1. Okay, I think so. Those are the 3 standard ramps per MDOT. So are there any other ramps apart from this? I mean, these are the standards. Anytime you have to deviate from this, then you have to provide a detail. And usually it's a combination of one of these ramps. But if you're deviating, then you have to provide a detail. All right, let's move on to the next component, which is detectable warning surface. And I'm sure you guys have seen this before. And where are these used basically? So detectable warning surface is not used at all the ramps. It's only used at street crossings and also at signalized entrances or like major intersections. There only you use detectable warning surface. Other sidewalk ramp locations, you don't need detectable warning surface. And why do you use these? I mean, the main purpose is for the people who have disabilities, like people who are blind or visually impaired, and they have with their stick, they can detect these and they will know that there is a possibility of a hazard in the pathway, or there is a street crossing or something like that. So, and they are aware of that. So that is the reason we provide these detectable warning surface. Okay, so the standard for the detectable warning surface is MD standard 655.40. Like how you have those MD standards for those sidewalk ramps. This is the standard for the detectable warning surface. And it has to be 24-inch minimum width, which is shown here. So this has to be minimum 24-inch. If it is not, then it's not compliant. So you have to replace the detectable warning surface. And the detectable warning surface width is equal to ramp width, which is here. See, whatever the ramp width is, suppose this is 5 feet, then the width of the detectable warning surface also has to be 5 feet. Suppose sometimes there are wider ramps also. Sometimes you use 6 feet ramps or 8 feet or 10 feet ramps, then this width of the detectable warning surface also has to match whatever that width is. And any skewed applications shall be no greater than 3 inch from the back of the curb. And the color contrast shall be like 70% different than the surface it is applied. So whatever the surface over here, it needs to have like 70% contrast from that. You cannot have, suppose you have like concrete, and you should not have similar concrete contrast detectable warning surface, because I think that's the standard they want to use, that it needs to have 70% contrast. All right, let's move on to the next one. So these are the different types of detectable warning surface. So the first one shown in the picture, and this was back in 2003. This is like a brick paver. Brick paver, one of the types of detectable warning surface. And then you have these stamped concrete. These are not recommended by M.SHA. And maybe the could be one of the reasons could be the contrast. See, there's no contrast between the concrete and the detectable warning surface. Maybe that could be the reason for that being not recommended by M.SHA. And the third one is glued down mats, and these are more, I mean, mostly used, and I have seen these mostly at most of the locations. Any other types? Any other recent changes? Anyone? Okay, all right. Let's move on. Okay, the next component is the driveways. And the key measurements for driveway aprons, the maximum cross slope for the path of travel is 2%, and it's regardless of the material used to construct the entrance. The materials used for the driveway entrance usually is like asphalt and concrete. And the minimum width for a sidewalk on a driveway apron is like 36-inch. And this will not require a design waiver, only for the driveways. Okay, let's look at the different types of driveway entrances. This is one of the MD standard driveway entrance. It's MD 630.01, and it's similar to the ramps. So here you have the entrance, and then you have the 12:1 max, and then 48:1. And this 12:1 max is for 2 feet. Usually it is 2 feet. And so if you take out 2 feet, then as per the MDOT requirements, you need to have like 60-inch minimum. So this will be like 3 feet, which is 36-inch. So for 2 feet, you will have 12:1 max. And then for the rest of the 3 feet, you need to have 2% max. And these are the driveway flares, which has to be 12:1 max on both sides. And adjacent to that, you have a sidewalk, and minimum as per the federal guidelines is 36-inch, but as for the MDOT SHA standards, it has to be 60-inch. So anytime you are below that, then you have to request for a waiver. So here you can see that this is this is the curb and gutter. So you have the back of the curb, and then this is the face of the curb, and then you have the gutter pan. And usually this is like 8-inch, and this sometimes varies, and this could be, most of the times it is like 1 feet, but you could sometimes see like 1.5 feet, 1.5 feet or 2 feet sometimes, but mostly it's like 1 feet. Okay, let's look at the section view of the MD 630-01. So as you can see, you have this curb, and usually at the driveways, you don't have the full 8-inch curb. You need to have like a depressed curb. So usually it is like 3-inch height. So it cannot be more than that. Otherwise, you will see a bump and it might damage your vehicle. So, and usually, and the type of curb used is type C curb. And for the sidewalk ramps, the curb, if you need to replace it, usually is type A. And most of the time it is type A, but you could see type B. So whatever the adjacent existing curb, you have to replace with the same curb. But most of the cases for the sidewalk ramps is type A. But for the driveways, you have to always use type C curb and gutter, and the standard for that is MD 620.02-01. And so the first 2 feet, like we discussed in the previous slide, it is 12:1 max, and then the remaining 36-inch is 48:1. And then after you're done with the 60-inch, if there is any elevation difference between the adjacent driveway portion, then you have to tie in, and the tie-in slope has to be 12:1 max, and then the other slopes will vary after that. So the material used for the driveway is 6-inch plain cement concrete pavement, and this is for the residential driveways. And if the driveway is in the commercial area, shopping lot or anything, then you have to use a thicker 8-inch plain cement concrete pavement. Right, that's the 63001. This is one of the example or one of the projects where you can see that 63001 was constructed, and you have the depressed type C curve, and then you have 12:1 max for the first 2 feet, and then rest of it is 48:1, and the width, the width is 36 inches. So if you meet all these, then the driveway is compliant. Otherwise, you have to reconstruct it. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is the second driveway entrance, and usually most of the stuff is similar to what we had on the other one. And this one is used where you have buffer. So the other one is used where you don't have the buffer, but this one, wherever you have buffer, you need to go with this MD63002. Yeah, I think the time is running out, so I will quickly go through the rest of the slides. So yes, similar to the other one, it's the same thing here. It's just you have buffer, and most of the stuff is the same here. And this is one of the example for the 63002. Let's move on to the next component, which is median. So medians are like two types. One of them is like cut through, and then you have the ramp median. So the cut through usually has like a curb over here, and then you have not curb, you just have a cut through, and it's usually flat, and you need to have like 60-inch minimum width, and this is used where you have 72-inch minimum. If you have 72-inch minimum, then this kind of cut through median can be used. And then you have ramp median, where you have basically ramps, and then you have a landing area here, and this is like 60-inch minimum also. And the next component is accessible pedestrian signals. Let's look at that. So the FHWA memo has that new construction must include this. Whenever you do new construction, you need to have this APS installed. And if you do any alteration, then you try to technically you still try to install this APS without regard to the cost. Yeah, like in the previous slide, so you need to have these at the new construction and any major reconstruction where signals or pedestrian indications are warranted, and also install APS and other features at all existing signal and pedestrian indications where you altered it. So if you have any modification to the existing, then you need the APS, or if you have a new construction, also you need to install this APS. Okay, some best APS design and installation. So the push button has to be less than 10 feet from the curb. Preferred is 1.5 to 6 feet, but it has to be less than 10 feet. And if you have like multiple push buttons, then it has to be separated by at least 10 feet. And the push button on stop bar side of the crosswalk, so it has to be installed on the stop bar side. And also arrow panel to the crosswalk. So the push button arrow panel should face the crosswalk. So wherever you're going to cross, it has to face, the arrow has to face that. And the push button should be 36-inch to 42-inch above the landing area. And push button accessible from level area, and it has to be like 18-inch reach. And the reason for the 18-inch reach is a person who is on the wheelchair. First of all, they have to be on. They have to be at the level area, and they should be able to stretch their arm and reach it. So that has to be 18-inch basically. It cannot be more than that. And the audible push button is not audible beyond 12 feet, so it cannot be beyond 12 feet. So all these are the best APS design and installation. I believe if you do not meet any of these, maybe Shang can add something onto this. You have to relocate it, Shang, or redesign it. Is Shang here or?
He's not here.
Okay, no problem. All right. Okay. So this is the picture showing you have two push buttons on the two sidewalk ramps here, and they are separated by 10 feet. And they have to face towards, I mean, the arrow has to face the crosswalk where you're going to cross. And the push button pole may be a stop pole or may also be also support ped head. Okay. All right. All right. So these are some of the checklists. Sometimes you need to carry to the field to make sure when you do the field work, you need to make notes, and some of these will be helpful to determine if the existing sidewalk is compliant or not compliant. So the checklist you need to have is if the sidewalk is 5 feet or 16 inch or not, or if it is not, what is the reason for that? And if the sidewalk is not 5 feet, then are there any 2 feet, 200, I mean, 5 feet passing zones every 200 feet? And that's one of the MDOT requirements. So suppose you have like maybe 36-inch sidewalk, and maybe due to constraints you might have in the field, there could be ADA waiver you can apply and they can approve that. But at the minimum, you still need to have like 5 feet passing zones every 200 feet. And the sidewalk cross slope has to be no greater than 2%. And the vertical elevation, or sometimes I mean, those drop offs you might see because of the sidewalk settlement, it has to be no greater than 1/4 of inch. And sometimes you might also see protruding objects, which could be anything like maybe utility pole and mailboxes, signal poles, and stuff like that. So if you see those, you make a note of that, and then you will see if you have minimum 36-inch clear pathway. If you don't, then you will try to see if you can make it 60-inch. If you cannot for some reason, then you will try to apply for a ADA waiver. And similar to the checklist for the sidewalks, you have checklist for the ramps. All the ramps have to be free from any obstacles, and it could be anything. Poles, sometimes you will see these dustbins and stuff in the ramps, sometimes anything. So, and the running slopes and the cross slopes, are they compliant? Do they meet the standards? So you need to make a note of that, and the width of the ramp. And is the landing compliant? Landing has always to be 2% max. So does it meet the criteria? So you just make the notes of all these. And then you see if detectable warning surface is needed at this ramp. Suppose if it is a major intersection or something, and then you need that. And if the detectable warning surface is not there, then you need to make a note and recommend detectable warning surface in that location. And also you look at the location of the ramp. Is it free from exposure to traffic? So you make all these notes in the field, and then you come back to the office, and using the engineering judgment, you make recommendations and submit to the MDOT. Okay. Similar to the ramps, you have the driveway checklist, which is wherever you have the sidewalk crosses is the driveway entrance cross slope meet the requirement, which is 2% max. Or at the point of crossing is the driveway entrance profile is in fact the sidewalk cross slopes. So you make these checks in the field and you make notes. And based on these notes, you make recommendations. Similar to these other ones, I will not go over these, but you have the checklist for the median treatments and the APS. And here you have protruding object in this case, which is mailbox. So whenever you have this kind of situation, then you have in that MDOT policy guideline, I showed in one of the slides, there is a standard how to, which is called 65502. And using that, you provide the, passing zone, or you make it ADA compliant. You provide like using, there is a formula like whatever this W is, you have to provide like 2W here, and you make this like 60-inch and make it compliant. Okay, I think most of you know all this equipment. I think the one some of you might not know is the inclinometer. This is the one which is used to measure the slope of the sidewalk or slope of the sidewalk ramp or flares, and make sure it is calibrated, and it has like a mercury in it, and you calibrate it before you take it to the field. And there are like different units on that one, like degrees, percentage. So make sure you have it set to whatever you want it to measure to. Like if you want it to measure in degrees, you set it to degrees. So sometimes you make mistake, you might get the reading and it could be in degrees, and you might make it note it as percentage, then there is a possibility of error. So just be careful about that. And safety is always important. So always carry hard hats and safety vests whenever you go to the field. And I think the OSHA policy is to have 2 people at all times to the field. So it's better to have 2 people go to the field whenever you do any field work. I think the others, this is measuring tape and the camera. Nowadays, you have these high-tech cameras, which has like 3-4 cameras in it. So. Okay, then you have the SHA ADA design process. I'm not going to go in detail about that. It's basically whenever you are not meeting and all the criteria for any of the components of the sidewalk or ADA, then you apply for the design waiver, and there is no guarantee that they will approve it. They will look at all the criteria, and if it is valid, then they will provide design waiver, approved design waiver. Otherwise, you have to make the sidewalk or ramp, whatever the component it is, to be ADA compliant. Okay, Pushkar, it is 1 o'clock already, man. So should we continue? I mean, the rest of the was just some identifying.
How many more slides do you have?
It's just some identifying common issues and stuff. I mean, it's just basically you look at these and see what are the common issues. I wanted to make this interactive, but we are running out of time at this time. And also I wanted to show some sample plans.
Yeah, let's try to plan a second session. Can we open for 5 minutes for any questions?
Okay. Yeah, let's do
whatever you presented. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Yeah, let's.
This is Mahendra. So if you go to that slide, that there was a post box protrusion.
Yeah, protruding object. Yeah, I will go there. Yeah.
What is the offset behind? There is no dimension.
So there's no Okay, I mean, for that, I need to show you the that standard. Yeah, I need to show you. If you go to the 65502, it's in the manual.
Okay,
And
so
it will
yeah, I think that answers my question because it is
Yeah,
not shown there.
and we are not inventing anything here. Basically, we just follow that guideline, and
Okay.
it's very clear. You know, basically
So,
what it is
it
you
is
you
that dimension is in the 65502.
yeah 650. Basically, what it is you see this dimension,
Uh-huh.
you measure that, so and you call it as W. Say for
Okay, the
example.
offset will be W on the other side also.
No, this is like 2W. This is like 2W, and
No,
this has
I am saying what is the offset into the buffer zone?
this one.
Yeah.
No, this one has to be, see this end of that mailbox. That's the limit for that.
Okay.
See, the mailbox is encroaching in the sidewalk, right? And you see the back of the mailbox. That's the offset for that. So
Okay.
whatever that is, you need to measure that. And once you have that, suppose if it's 2 feet, then you need to provide like 4 feet here, 4 feet here, and then this has to be like 60 by 60.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, he was
Welcome.
asking the buffer. What is the buffer for that?
I answered the question, man. I don't know what you have. Another question for me? You're okay, right, Mahendra?
Yeah, I got that. You told 60 by 60, said that answers my question.
All right, sounds good, man. Any other questions?
So all of these ADA requirement, the limits and the guidelines, they also apply for the shared use path. I think shared use path have their own limit.
Yeah,
right?
that's the bicycle policy. It comes under that.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone
Also,
else?
I think like general rule of thumb that I've learned in the past is that your landing area width or length should match the width of your sidewalk. So let's say if you have like a 7-foot sidewalk, you should have a 7-foot long landing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So
As
it's-
long you meet that 60-inch minimum, we are
Yep,
good.
60.
So
Yep.
so that's why it said 60-inch minimum. It can be anything after that.
I want to say some states like kind of, it might have been Montgomery County that forces you to match the width of sidewalk.
Yeah. And there are other things in the manual. I mean, I took some of the things from the manual, but if you guys go, let me show you that screen where I have that link. Or what you can do is just Google m.sha ADA policy and guidelines, and then it will take you over there. So see this link. If you click that link, it will take you to the manual, and it has some other stuff in there also, which is not captured in these slides. So it's better to, it's a good guidance, these slides, but if you want the complete picture, I would highly recommend to go to the actual manual, which has more information in it. So I covered some of it. I wouldn't say I covered all of it, but most of it I covered, I believe. All right, any other questions?
Yes, Abib, quick question on crosswalks.
Okay.
Whenever you have detectable, do you have to, is it a requirement to add a crosswalk, or you can have detectable without crosswalk?
Detectable without.
Because whenever you have a detectable is a street, right? If it's a driveway, you don't need it.
Yeah, we
But
don't
if
need
it's
driveway.
if it's a streets with a name, you need to put the detectable. And do you also have to, for a fact, have to add a crosswalk,
Street
pavement marking, or
crossings.
not?
No,
Yeah.
I think some street crossings, they don't have
The crosswalk, okay.
crosswalk, I believe, right?
Is there-
Correct me if this is wrong, Pushkar or anyone.
Is there a
So
guideline when you need it or not?
yeah, I think at the street crossings, but like here, if you see in the example here, I don't see any crosswalk at all. See
That's
that?
true. Yeah.
I think if it's like if you're
So I don't
crossing
think
like
you
a
need to have
high,
a crosswalk. Crosswalk may not be needed.
Okay. I guess maybe it's a recommendation from traffic when they see a heavy volume of pads, then they request it.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's not
Okay.
the ADA requirement anyway, so.
Okay.
It's a traffic requirement, so.
Okay.
Mr. Shang is not here, okay?
Mhm.
All right, any other questions? Any new people? Let's see who is here. Case and Jason, you already were, okay, Laura. Solomon, Amaya. You guys have any questions? Because this, I think most of the highway people know this topic already, but this could be something new for some of you. Like especially water resources people. They might be aware of this, but could be something new. Right, Ankur, Arun, you guys are familiar with these, right? Most of these, and Mahendra.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, man. Any other questions, or was this helpful today, or how was it?
Yeah, I think it was helpful as far as just understanding, you know, the design constraints you guys have. You know, a lot of the times we go over the constraints for water resources, but it's good to know this stuff on your end.
All right, Wahid, you've been quiet, man. Any questions?
No questions. Yeah, you covered almost everything.
Okay. Any changes recently? Any? So the detectable warning surface, they're still using those yellow mats, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. All right, if no other questions, thank you all for joining. I think this session is recorded, so you guys can access it anytime. So with that, I will end the session. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Take care. Bye.